Hello, I have more books and films for you. Welcome back. Or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Dakota and I read a lot of books, watch a lot of films. That's the whole shtick. I have so many reviews and recommendations for you today. I went a little bit crazy in October, the passage of time. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 films. That's 17 books and films. I went a little bit crazy. Sue me, arrest me, officer. I'm a little bit crazy. I felt like consuming media in October. It's the start of autumn, sue me. There's nothing better than being curled up in bed with a mug of tea and a good book or film. Also, I had to hibernate for a little bit because I went a little bit too hard with the social settings and had to pull back, was forced to pull back because of an incident, you see. So let's talk about the books that I read initially. Before we jump into the books though, let's talk about today's wonderful sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is a platform which makes the whole process of creating and maintaining websites seamless and honestly enjoyable. I say this from personal experience because in an endeavour to offer a space to spotlight underground artists and writers, I built an online literary and arts journal / magic little community via Squarespace. You can submit your poetry, fiction, art or essays based on the monthly prompt and I just might publish your work. Squarespace is brilliant for turning passion projects such as this into professional projects and morphing dreams and concepts into tangible realities. This is made easier via features like Design Intelligence, which builds on 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise to craft a bespoke digital identity to use across one's entire online presence. There's so many more incredible features like Squarespace Payments, which is the easiest way to manage your payments in one place as there is the option to sell content and earn revenue. Coming from a considerably technologically inept girl who built her own entire site from scratch, it is honestly so fun to design and tailor to your needs. You can head to squarespace.com/DakotaWarren to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using code DakotaWarren. The books that I read this month are rather funny actually. They're all of varying degrees of genre, but in a very, very unique way. So the first book, this is Mona Lisa's. I picked this up at a charity bookstore in Notting Hill. I think it's the Oxfam. Near Portobello Market, and this is a collection of all of the Mona Lisas throughout history that have been replicated and copied, and it also gave a good history on the actual piece of art herself and what's behind it and who's behind it and how it doesn't really matter who's behind it because it's not about her, it's about Da Vinci's interpretation and illumination and mythologization of her. That was a really nice trio of words. As I said, this is mostly a fun read. This is Stalin as Mona Lisa, with a bit of history about Stalin as Mona Lisa. Here we have other variations of Mona Lisa and how her particular kind of style and pose kind of shaped the Renaissance, but yeah, I read this for research purposes. And you'll know why soon, but I can't tell you why now. The next book that I read was Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. I read this because I remember when I was a little girl, my mother told me to read it. And, oh, not so little, I think I was about 8 or something. Because she read them, and I think there's many books, I think it's a series, and she read all of them and she told me that I'd like to read them. And I never did, because I had raging demand avoidance and could never do what I was told or read what I was told. I'd always do the opposite. But then I walked past this, I happened across this in the bookstore, and I was just strolling past, and I remembered that my mother read these and told me to read these, and I have no idea how she feels about them now because she's gone on a whole journey with her faith. But I read it. This is book 1. I'm sure there's many more, but this is book 1, and I think the premise is meant to be this guy had this revelation, this conversation with God, where God kind of used him to transcribe the answers to his own questions, and there's no real way to know if it's real or not, but I think that some of the dialogue, whether real or not, is really beautiful. Not necessarily about faith, but kind of just about life itself. This was a sentimental read, not that I've read it before, a sentimental read as in there was backstory to this one, so I read this. This also took me the entire month to read because I kept on putting it down and not going back to it, and then, you know, this was the book across the month that stretched over that I read a little bit of at a little time. This wasn't a full sit down engulfed read. It was a lot to take in actually, so The next book that I read was Death Styles by Joy L. McSweeney. I was sent a bunch of poetry books and I can't remember who sent me them. Which publisher? If you're watching this and you're the publisher that sent me them, thank you so much, and please tell me who sent me them because I don't know. Instagram's had this update where when you have conversations, if you don't use them for a bit, they kind of just go to the middle of nowhere. And I couldn't search or find who sent me these books. But anyway, I got sent a bunch of poetry books and this is the first one I read, and this one was quite beautiful, I'm pretty sure. This is a follow-up to other collections from the author, Joy L. McSweeney. This one sets herself the task of writing a poem a day and accepting a single icon as her starting point, however unlikely. River Phoenix, Mary Magdalene, a backyard skunk, McSweeney follows each inspiration to the point of exhaustion and makes it through each difficult day. In frank, mesmeric lyrics, Death Styles navigates the opposing forces of survival and grief, finding a way to press against death's interface to step the wrong way out of the grave. I have 4 dog-eared pages, meaning there was 4 poems that I particularly liked out of the entire book. I think that's a pretty good ratio of poetry collections because it's hard to find a whole collection that resonates because everybody's in such a different path of life. But by memory, I did enjoy this one because obviously I finished it. And that's a good sign, isn't it? I find that if I don't resonate with a poetry collection when I'm halfway through, I will put it down and return to it at a later stage in my life when I feel I am thus more inclined to perhaps resonate with it. Or a stage of my life that will be more relative. So I read this and it was quite nice. The next book that I read was another poetry collection from the same batch of poetry collections sent to me, and this is Skeletons by Deborah Landau. This is a series of poems preoccupied with loneliness and mortality. It's initiated during Brooklyn's early lockdown. The book reflects the increasingly troubling simultaneity of Eros and Thanatos, discontents of our virtual lives amidst the threats of a pandemic, and corrosive politics. I resonated with a lot less in this. There's, how many pages do I have dog-eared? 2. I've got 2 poems dog-eared, so there's 2 poems out of this that I liked. I think I resonated with this last just because it's a different perspective and a different chapter of life, but the writing is still gorgeous and I'm sure somebody will absolutely devour this. Obviously many people have because I think it is doing very well. These are earthy and angsty about mortality and cosmic despair and kind of sorry, not sorry kind of voice, and if that sounds like you'll enjoy it, then read this. I think it's a different part of life to where I currently am. The next book that I read was, you guessed it, another poetry collection. I read so much poetry this month. I was in a massive poetry mood. This is Will Burns' Natural Burial Ground. And this is like that classic kind of English poet who writes about the English landscape in this really beautiful way. I do love that. I think it's really special it's really particular, I find, with English poetry, writing about the English landscape in such a visceral way, because it is so poetic to write about these rolling green fields and these meadows and these forests and these woodlands and then these little countrysides with these quaint cobbled streets, and everything really is so poetic and almost ballet to write about. Will Burns is a soulful English poet of the kind we don't make enough of, fiercely intelligent, sensitive to the tiniest nuances of politics or history, attentive to the light and shade of human relationships, constantly addressing ideas of landscape and place, and gentle, warm introspection. He's a poet of the unglamorous, artificial English homelands, honest about class, memory, unease, and experience in a way that few contemporary writers are. He doesn't try and sound clever in the line, he shows across his whole body of work that he is truly wise. That's quite the review. That's a really gorgeous review. A soulful English poet of the kind we don't make enough of. I think because I'm not from England, whilst I live in England, I think because I'm not actively from Shaw ancestors, because I'm not actively from England, I think it's, when I find this really environmental set English poetry, it's hard for me to find a home in that. But the more time that I spend here, and I have had some really incredible experiences, I should say, as of late, where I have been indulging in this landscape and this gorgeous countryside and these woodlands, and every time I'm there I have this distinct thought where I realise, oh, the poems make sense now. The poems are starting to make more and more sense, so there's that. Next book that I read, you guessed it, wow. This is Ada Limon, Sharks in the Rivers, and I love Ada Limon. I think she's absolutely brilliant, truly wonderful, one of my most incredible poetic inspirations of all time. I think her work is breathtaking. In 2022, I was nominated as a finalist for the Best Poetry Book of the Year, my book, with hers. which was, I still think about that frequently with other people that I absolutely admire, like Goshen Bong and so forth. So this, and Sandra Cisneros. So this means so much to me, perhaps more than it ever has and ever will and ever could. And so I read this, and I read many of her other collections, and this one was part of the lot that was sent to me. I have 3 pages dog-eared, which means that 3 poems resonated with me massively. Massively, because they're all painted in ink as well, which I probably should stop doing. That's probably a bad habit that I should stop doing. But I kind of like scribbling all over my books. Anyway, there's that. This is, what is this about? Let me tell you. From US Poet Laureate Ada Limon, an extraordinary collection at once urbane and earthy that navigates the thoroughfares and tributaries of human nature. There was a lot of words in that sentence that I had to think in the spot, how do I pronounce this? You know when you read words and don't say them out loud, so you kind of have no idea how to say them out loud? I always do that, and because I have a YouTube channel and a platform and so forth, I will say these words that I've read plenty and know the meaning of very well, but because I don't know how to pronounce it, I get destroyed in the comments. Because of my silly accent as well sometimes. Anyway, the last book that I read from cover to cover is really funny. Catholicism for Dummies. I picked this up from a thrift store, a charity store, years ago. I think 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, ages ago. And it's because it's funny, and I think it was about £1 or something, and I think it's funny because it's Catholicism for Dummies. Context, I'm Catholic, was raised Catholic, was born Catholic, and this made me laugh because it's just the biggest Catholicism for Dummies, and so I bought it just to kind of have as just a cherished piece of something funny, and so I keep it on my bookshelf facing this way so I can see it. And then the other day I came home and I saw it and I was kind of jutting out, and I thought, you know what, let's read it. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've obviously, my last theology lessons were when I was in high school and had to study religion mandatorily. And so I read it from cover to cover because, lo and behold, it's actually a lot of pictures and diagrams and charts and whatnot, not completely word to word. So this was, I did not think I was going to read it cover to cover, so I grabbed it out and I opened it up and I looked at it. And I was just going to flick through and have a little look-see to see what kind of information it offered. And then lo and behold, hours later, I'm on the last page. Interesting. I'm now full of fresh facts about the church. And that's all the books that I read in October. You can see it's been an interesting month. Undertones of religion and poetry. I am the first person to admit that I did go slightly mad this month. There was an incident and an episode and a series of consequences that followed. And so the books very much reflect how this month has been. Let's talk about films. The first film that I watched this month was The Joker, 2019. And that's because the new one came out and I was gearing up. My friend went to the premiere and saw it prior to everybody else, and he said that it was absolutely brilliant. And so I was gearing myself up to this brilliant thing. And so I watched the first one and I watched it so I could go see the sequel, and this film was, what did I say? Incredible acting, very grueling, but it was a great film. I can recognize that it's a great film, and Joaquin Phoenix did an incredible job, and it gets under your skin and this whole thing, but I feel like I'd resonate with it more if I was a lonely boy or something like that. It feels like a real, like, kind of loner man, stick it to the man kind of film. I don't know, as a girl who's full of love, watching that just didn't obviously resonate with me very much. Anyway, I watched that gearing up to go to see the second one, and then by the time the second one came out, everybody said it was awful and to avoid watching it at all costs, and so I've still not gone to go see it, and I don't like that I've been swayed and biased by everybody's opinion. Comment below, please, tell me if you think I'd enjoy it or not based on what you know of my taste thus far. I'm curious. I've not yet seen it. I don't know if I will. I don't know if I want to. I don't know if it'll be a waste of time or not. Also, it's spooky month, and so I watched a lot of spooky films. The next film that I watched was The Wicker Man, 1973. I spoke about this in my last video, which is a recommendation of folk horror films. It's one of my favourite genres in the whole entire world. I'll briefly go about it, because if you want more folk horror recommendations, you can go to that video. But this film itself is about somebody who's not from this place. He goes to this island. It's Christian men, goes to an island of pagans and can't really understand their ways and disrespects it, and it ends up being quite literally the death of him. But it's, as is folk horror, it just tells so much story about people and the land and the connection. It's one of my favourite films of all time, and I recommend that greatly. That's one of my favourite films ever, so that's starting off this month very strong. The next film that I watched was The Holy Mountain, 1973. I was on a kind of, after that I was on this kind of psychedelic, not horror, psychedelic, psychological film binge. Does that make any sense? It probably doesn't. My words are evading me. But The Holy Mountain, it's this alchemist assembles together a group of people from all walks of life to represent the planets in the solar system. The occult adept's intention is to put his recruits through strange mystical rites and divest them of their worldly baggage before embarking on a trip to Lotus Island. There they ascend the Holy Mountain to displace the immortal gods who secretly rule the universe. It is as trippy as it sounds. Watching this is a trip, and my main takeaway from this is the visuals are so insane and wonderful and brilliant and incredible, and not enough good words to describe the visuals that are an absolute trip, that it took away from the plot, because I couldn't focus on the plot because every single scene that came up I was just watching it like, whoa, how did they do this? One of my favourite films for visuals. Very beautiful, interesting, terrifying, fascinating film. The next film that I watched was Alice, 1988. I'm pretty sure it's Czechoslovakian. This is an Alice in Wonderland variation remake. It's my favourite remake of all time because it's so terrifying in the most innocent way. It's for children, obviously. Alice in Wonderland is ultimately for children, but as I like to say, if you read the book, you kind of realise that it's not necessarily as much for children. But this remake, one of my favourites, my favourite I should say, of all time. The visuals, so they've got these puppets that are just so quirky. Quirky is the right word. Quirky is the most literal sense that I can explain it. It's so quirky and it's so odd and it's so strange, and there's these puppets and there's this girl and she's just walking around in this beautiful dress, just observing and confused by everything, and there's these, the Mad Hatter variation is so interesting, and there's this baby who won't stop crying that represents something, and it's just, basically it's a really trippy, strange variation of Alice in Wonderland, which is probably closest to the text, given how trippy and strange it truly is. So I recommend that very much also. The next film that I watched was The Capsule, 2012. Basically there's these 7 girls who are created and have this kind of monarch leader who teaches them how to be good girls, good women. And it's this short film. I watched it on Mubi, and it's an absolute, I see, every day I've been watching it, I keep on saying it's an absolute trip, but it is. It's also psychedelic, but not in the literal sense. It's just strange. It's so strange. At the very crux of it all, it's just very strange. I mean, what did I say? I said, yeah, I think it made me think a lot. I think it made me think a lot. Very certain in my words there. It made me think a lot, and it had an interesting message, but it was a little bit on the nose regarding what constructs a good woman and this whole thing. And I think that the visuals were absolutely stunning. I've seen, if you watch my videos a lot, you know how much visuals mean to me, and if a film is pretty and has absolutely no plot, I'm going to love it and recommend it. This film was visually incredible, but I think that it was so on the nose that it took away from it a little bit, but I still did ultimately love it. The visuals are very right up my alley. There's goats. They're in a castle. There's girls who are eating each other's faces and hissing at each other and wearing lingerie. But cool lingerie. And learning to dance with a piano. I like it. It's a short film. I mean, you're not going to waste much of your life if you don't like it. So the next film that I watched was Friends and Strangers, 2021. This was Australian cinema. I always say this when I go into Australian cinema, I don't expect anything, because unfortunately Australian cinema tends to suck. Why is that? I just don't think it's a massive industry there. You know, everyone who does anything in Australia tends to leave Australia to do that thing elsewhere, because there's just not really a scene. I say that even as a writer in Australia, there just wasn't that much of a scene. And I've got friends who are actors from Australia who also left Australia because there isn't that much of a scene. So the scene, unfortunately, is condensed to this thing. But this was one of the better films that I have seen. It was a decent example of Australian cinema. It's one of these... Have you seen... I love when I address you directly. Have you seen, which if you watch my videos, I hope you've seen by now because I recommend it all the time because it's one of my favourites in the whole entire world. The Worst Person in the World. It's a Norwegian film, and it's about this couple, and they're both just on their own journey and doing awful human things because they just want to live their lives, but it's kind of an everyday thing and not too much happens, but also so much happens. This is like the slow more frigid, a bit more empty version of that if it was set in Australia and if not much really happened at all. So that's the best I can compare it. It's very much just adults who don't know what they're doing kind of film. You have to be patient for this one. It's very slow. I find with a lot of Australian cinema actually. Anyway, the next two films that I watched is Paddington Bear 1 and Paddington Bear 2. My best friend is absolutely obsessed with Paddington. I don't know if I'd say obsessed, she's probably going to watch this and say I'm not obsessed, but she adores Paddington. And there's a pretty sure the new ones coming out or something, I don't know, and I haven't seen any of them ever. I'm the kind of person who grew up not watching kids films, but I would watch documentaries. I would watch what my mum watched, which happened to be a lot of documentaries and a lot of true crime and a lot of just more mature things in itself, and I read a lot and that kind of thing. And so I'm not very experienced and familiar with the classic children's films, and so I haven't seen this, and she made me go to a double bill screening of 1 and 2, and it was a random Sunday morning. We just sat there with snacks just watching Paddington 1 and 2. I had no idea what to expect. But these were brilliant, I loved them so much. The first one was but the second one with Hugh Grant, I loved it so much. And the entire time I was sat there, I was so engulfed. I felt like a child. I had my snacks, I was kicking my feet on the chair, I was like leaning like this into the big screen. Paddington 2, I think is brilliant. I'm going to say that with my chest. As someone who just recommended a whole bunch of art house, psychedelic, psychological cinema, Paddington 2 is a great film. I don't want to describe the plot too much because I mean, you've got to see it yourself, man. But this is unironically, it makes so much sense, but Paddington 2 is one of the highest rated films across all of the boards, I think, like on IMDb, on Rotten Tomatoes, on Letterboxd. And so I completely agree that it's wonderful, and Hugh Grant carries the film on his back. If you don't know, Paddington's a little English bear. Or he's not English, but he gets brought to England, and he's this little bear who's trying to assimilate, but he's a bear, and so he just keeps on doing everything wrong, and he's also a kid, but he's got enemies like Hugh Grant. Need I say more? Anyway, the next film that I watched, see, after this I was on a Hugh Grant kick, and so I watched Notting Hill 1999. I've never seen this before, this is my first time watching this, but I was describing to a friend how much I enjoyed Hugh Grant's performance in Paddington 2, and she said, well, you have to see Notting Hill. So I went home and I watched Notting Hill that exact same day. In the same day, I watched Paddington Bear 1 and 2 and Notting Hill. It's been a rough month. I keep on saying it. I'm gonna let you know right now. Notting Hill I didn't actually like all too much. I think I came after the hype. I think for a lot of people who love this film, it's because they watched it like a lot earlier and it was special and it was cool back then, but I think that I watched it too late and there's better things now, and I don't know, I just didn't love it, but it was fun. Oh yes, I should tell you what the film's about. Basically, I just assume with these classics that everyone's seen them, and I haven't. But this is about Hugh Grant owns a little bookstore in Notting Hill, and there's this super famous actress, played by, what's that gorgeous woman's name? Julia Roberts. She kind of plays herself in a way. She's this super famous actress. She finds herself in his bookstore. Lo and behold, this random nobody guy with a little quirky, awkward little demeanor in his little bookstore in Notting Hill, and this massive big time actress fall in love. I didn't like it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. The next and final film that I watched in October was, drumroll please, this is a rewatch, you guessed it, Robert Eggers' The Witch. Obligatory rewatch. This is one of my favourite films ever. I think it's one of the most incredible examples of folk horror, but more specifically, period accurate folk horror. Robert Eggers is so good with period accuracy. He puts his whole heart into it, and I'm so excited for Nosferatu when that comes out. I'm pretty sure it comes out soon, doesn't it? The remake. He's the one person that I would trust to do a good remake of Nosferatu, because the original of Nosferatu is unbeatable. If you live in London, FYI, if you live in London and you haven't seen Nosferatu, or you have, it's a super old vampire movie for context. They at the Prince Charles Cinema in Chinatown, they screen it pretty regularly, but sometimes they have a live orchestra doing the score, because it's a silent film, so they have the live orchestra doing the score for the film, as the film plays, and it's a really magical special experience, so that's something that I recommend to my fellow Londoners. That is all the books and films that I watched in October. As I said, it's been a very strange month. Autumn, beautiful autumn, it does things to me, man. It makes me go a little bit mad. I think for some people, autumn's the kind of month where it either comforts you and brings you back to yourself after summer, or it makes you go mad if you're more grounded in crazy summer, such as myself. I hope you got some kind of recommendation or something from this rather insane, completely uncurated list, by the way. We've got Catholicism for Dummies, we've got Paddington Bear 1 and 2. I hope you have a lovely day. Tell me what you watched or read this month, if it's of any interest to anybody, because I'm always interested. Tell me how you feel as well regarding autumn, because I feel like I'm the only person who's grounded in the craziness of summer and the sweatiness of summer. I just feel so at home and so myself in the chaos of summer. So when it starts to become this more grounded, wholesome, cozy thing like autumn and winter, I lose myself in it completely. It brings me to this level of forced introspection that I am not ready for. Ever. Never will be. Anyway. I love you very much, and I will see you at the next video, whenever that is, soon.